All right, we have points today. So if you guys could take out your notebooks, we just have the parts that are highlighted to write down. Everything else on this slide should be review. Today we're going to be comparing and contrasting Egypt and Mesopotamia. Specifically looking at how their physical geography influenced their human geography. And I want to start off by talking about the point of comparing and contrasting. It is very useful in history and in life to look for similarities between things, to find patterns, to try to learn lessons, to try to make good decisions. But you have to both look for similarities and then also differences if you want to do that well. Comparing without contrasting is really lazy work. And you will see this a lot in the news. It is a pretty clear and commonly stated logical fallacy, for example, that like, I don't know, Biden and Trump are the same because they're both old. Well, okay, but there are a lot of really important differences between those two candidates. And if you don't look at the differences too, you're not really communicating any information, you're just pretending to. So, hopefully, working on this kind of thing in social studies classes will keep you from being fooled in your adult lives by people who make really lazy comparisons all the time. Like, COVID's just like the flu. Well, it's not really. There are some really important differences, but you'll hear like the lazy comparison part all the time. And when your suspicions should go up is when the people who are comparing things don't also talk about what's different. So we have to do all of it. But the new information for you on the slide is highlighted. Everything else is actually already in your notes. So we'll go over it. First off, both Egypt and Mesopotamia are river valley civilizations. So we can talk about what river valley civilizations have in common. They were one of 4 river valley civilizations to arise in the Old World and then 2 more in the Americas. And all of these river valley civilizations used river water to irrigate crops. So they arose near rivers. They're all near rivers. And because they're civilizations, we already have a list of things that we can look for that Egypt and Mesopotamia will have in common. The list of characteristics of civilization, like we talked about before, is also a list of effects of the Neolithic Revolution, so we can simplify in our minds both of those things. We're not learning 2 different lists, we're combining lists. So all river valley civilizations, and this should still be a review, they practice sedentary agriculture, meaning they stay in one place and grow food, and that's how they eat. In order to become a civilization, they all have to have food surpluses. Because you need extra food, you need the surplus of food to free up time for some people in society to, instead of farming all day, spend their time learning skills that take time and training to master, like writing, being a priest in a religion, like making weapons, et cetera, et cetera. So sedentary agriculture leads to food surplus, and that leads to specialization. And as soon as you have people who are making different things for society, then you have trade. So our first list of 4 things are causes and effects. They're all effects of the Neolithic Revolution, and they're all characteristics of civilization. Once you have trade, as we saw yesterday, eventually you're going to need a method of record keeping. And so you develop writing, a system to put language on paper and preserve it. Civilizations all have those things, so Egypt and Mesopotamia both have those things. Furthermore, in the process of developing these things, as populations grew, as population density grew, society developed a hierarchy, a division of society into levels of power and wealth, with the most powerful at the top and the least powerful at the bottom. And as we learned, no matter where you look, Although the specifics might be different. At the top, you always have a ruler or a king and religious power kind of working hand in hand. In the middle, you have priests, you have the elite, you have bureaucrats, people who do the work of government but don't have any power to make decisions themselves, coming from the French word for desk, kind of like people at the driver's license office. You have specialized workers, people who have special skills that not everybody else has. So they all kind of make up the middle. And then at the very bottom, you have peasants, so like people who do the agricultural work, farmers, slaves. This is true of all civilizations. In addition, to be a civilization, we're looking for a place with government, formal government and laws, organized religion, and art and architecture. All civilizations have these things. So Egypt and Mesopotamia have these things. The difference is in the specifics. In terms of the specifics, we saw this week that Egypt developed along the Nile River, and that the Nile River was like the chillest, most wonderful river ever because it flooded according to a schedule and not violently, and it was navigable, so you could like go down it. We also saw that Egypt was surrounded by the Sahara Desert. And because deserts are topographical features that make it difficult to, communicate and trade and cross, Egypt was therefore protected from a lot of attack. So natural geographic boundaries, like the desert, and predictable flooding of the Nile River led Egypt to become an incredibly politically stable civilization that lasted thousands and thousands of years. For distinctive details, we could have gone a lot of ways with this, so this is by no means the only thing that Egypt did that was like unique or special or noteworthy, but because the pyramids are so monumental, they're a great example of monumental architecture as a trait of civilization. Monumental architecture just means really big buildings that you can only really build if you have a lot of power. And so they show people like, oh man, the king here has a lot of power. And that's kind of the point. Moving on to Mesopotamia. We saw Mesopotamia develop between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was the first civilization, and it was kind of a mess, Mesopotamia. It was a mess because of physical geography, right? They had no geographic boundaries. Mesopotamia is incredibly flat, no mountains protecting it. There wasn't like a giant desert to prevent people from coming. And so, being easy to invade, it was invaded pretty regularly. At the same time, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers flooded irregularly, unpredictably, and very like disastrously and chaotically. So that instability in physical geography was mirrored by political instability. It was invaded often. Sometimes there were city-states, then a Babylonian empire came, then later came the Persians, etc., etc. Never ends for Mesopotamia. What a mess. In terms of distinctive details, though, we did see that they developed writing, which was hugely important for so many reasons, not just because it allows history to begin with primary sources that come from writing, but also because it allowed people to have written legal codes where they could exert their power over really, really big distances, much like Hammurabi did with his code of law that allowed him to rule an empire that was like big for the time, but at the same time, kept the social hierarchy the way it was by protecting the power of the people at the top and keeping the people at the bottom with less power. Also patriarchy. Okay, so this was it for the day. Those are our key points for the day. Do you guys have any questions? Any questions at all?